Good evening, and welcome to the August FLAIR, First Ladies Association for Research and Education virtual program. My name is Diana Carlin, and I'm the president of FLAIR for 2026 and 2027. For those of you who aren't familiar with FLAIR, our mission is to create and sustain a network to promote and publicize research and education relevant to the contributions, lives, impacts, and lasting legacies of U.S. First Ladies. So for those of you who are members who are watching, thank you for being members. And I especially want to thank our institutional members. And I think we will have yes, there they are. We're going to be adding a few more, so look forward to our next program, which will be September 23rd at 7 p.m. And we will hopefully have some new members to add to that list. There are several thank yous I want to make tonight. One is to the program committee, Chris Leahy, who is our vice president, Jennifer Taylor, who's going to be moderating tonight. You'll meet her in a minute. Heath Lee, Katie Sibley, and Deborah Scalas-Giokas are our programs committee. So thank you all. And Jennifer, especially thank you for bringing Jake to our attention. And I think Sharon Leahy, who's our producer, so thank you to Sharon for producing tonight's program, was the first one who maybe thought Jake would make a great program. So tonight's program is titled Soft Power, An Artist's Journey to America's First Ladies. And one of the things that's exciting about FLAIR is that we all come from this from very, very different perspectives. And if you're interested in First Ladies, there's a place for you in FLAIR. So please go to flair-net.org and you can easily join FLAIR. And we welcome anyone who has an interest in First Ladies who simply wants to support what we're doing. So at this time, I want to turn this over to tonight's moderator, Jennifer Taylor. And Jennifer is the founder and editor of East Wing Magazine, which is the major way you're going to find out about what's going on with First Ladies on a regular basis. So Jennifer, thank you for agreeing to moderate tonight. We're looking forward to this program.
Thank you, Diana. Thank you for that nice introduction. I am delighted to moderate this FLAIR program this evening, especially because the featured guest is someone I've had a chance to get to know. Please welcome Jake Gariepy. And Jake is an artist specializing in paper goods for museum and historical site gift stores. His work includes a special focus on American First Ladies, their fashion, the White House, and historical buildings, which is what made me curious about Jake when I interviewed him for East Wing Magazine back in 2025. Jake's work has been commissioned by museums and historic site shops such as the White House, the Maryland Center for History and Culture, the Newport Historical Society, the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library, Highclere Castle, and many others. Jake and his work can be followed on Instagram, but tonight we'll get to know him and his work a little better. Those of you watching live, feel free to post your questions in the comments, and we'll get to them after Jake's presentation. Jake, go ahead and take it away.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that introduction and the opportunity to speak to all of you tonight. Before I prepared my presentation, I was a little worried because I thought of this group and all of the people who are part of it. And I started to think, what do I know about First Ladies or the White House or presidents that I can tell them? And I asked, I shared this with my kids. I have 8 children. And they said, Dad, don't worry. You can talk about this for much longer than an hour. And they know from experience because I have talked about it on family trips and anything else. So my kids are as in tune to First Ladies as anybody else in the country. And I'm not sure how they feel about that, but they've been very supportive. Well, it's really fun to be able to talk to you about how I sort of came to this point, because as you can imagine, especially growing up, an interest in First Ladies, the White House, presidents, was probably not sort of the most obvious thing for, if you want to go to the next slide, this 8-year-old boy in a predominantly sort of manufacturing town in Oregon to be interested in. This is a picture of me sort of when it all began. This is 1981. And I'd probably been reading about the British royal family and the White House and presidents, all of that sort of thing, for about a year at this point. And my mom, who was very aware of my interests and very supportive, she had this birthday cake made for me. And the image on the birthday cake is actually taken from the logo for Queen Elizabeth II's Silver Jubilee. that gives you some indication of how into these subjects I was. And I thought that was just the greatest cake ever. I still do. The books that you see here, and I'm going to talk a lot about books, magazines, and so on today, because these are the things that really awakened my interest and kept my interest for some time. First, I'd seen a poster outside of my first grade classroom. It was of the presidents, engravings of each one. And then down in the corner, there were some little images of the White House. I vividly remember the Red Room and the State Dining Room and the impression that those pictures made on me. I went home, I looked in our World Book Encyclopedia, which I'd already loved to sit in the comfiest chair in the house, and just pore over all of the images and information in there. I looked up the White House, started to look up information about presidents and first ladies, and it just sort of grew from there. My brother, who was in the Army, he was older than me by about 10 years, and of course I looked up to him and thought he was great. He went to Washington, D.C., and came back with these three books for me: the White House Historic Guide, the book about first ladies, and the book about the presidents. Now, I immediately loved these books. And before I even started reading them, which really reading them came sometime later, I would pore over the pictures every day. Literally every day, I'd look at these books. And I was just so drawn in by what I was seeing. Something I think that's interesting about kids is they often find an interest before they even understand the words to express that interest, or even the words they're reading on the page. And I think it was Jackie Kennedy who said something about, if it never hurts a child to read above their level. And that's really what happened to me. If you'd like to go to the next slide. Uh, in the book about first ladies, the first thing, as I said, was the images. And I think that's probably why I illustrate more than I write now. It's because it was the images that captured me. And I'm just going to show you now six of the images in that book that seemed to impact me the most, that drew me in. And something that I notice in looking at these, for example, is these are very strong women, and that comes across in these portraits. Helen Taft, before I knew anything about Helen Taft, seeing this portrait of her gave me that sense of her strength, her importance. And I also loved that she was wearing a tiara because, of course, I loved the royal family and all of that. And so she sort of tied right into that before I even knew what all that meant. If you'd like to go to the next slide. I've always had a particular interest and an affection for the mid-century first ladies, really starting with Eleanor Roosevelt, going through Lady Bird Johnson and Pat Nixon. And you see these portraits again. These are the ones that really stood out to me. Mamie Eisenhower, how can that portrait not stand out to you with all of that color and that pink dress? And it was very interesting to me and really drew me in. With Eleanor Roosevelt, she's so active in this painting. Her hands are she's constantly on the move, constantly doing something. And I just found that also to be something that caught my eye. And finally, Lady Bird Johnson. Again, I think it's probably the colors, the way the image is composed. It just caught my attention. And so what I see when I look at these pictures and these portraits is something that I try to do with mine. They're very different, of course, than these, but I really try to give something that people can look at, that will draw them in, that they'll see a detail that might interest them, that there will be something inviting about those pictures, because that was the experience that I had. Go ahead and go to the next slide, please. I don't know about all of you, but I joined a bunch of Facebook groups years ago that had to do with the White House, with presidential and first lady history. And to a person, almost, we could point back to our early interest being stimulated by the same things, by the books that I just shared with you. And virtually everybody was beholden to J.B. West for giving them a greater understanding of what the role of First Lady was, but also what the First Lady was like behind the scenes, what the White House was like behind the scenes, how things worked. I mean, this is the book that really took me sort of much more deeply into the personal lives, the stories behind the official biographies and beyond the formal portraits. And I honestly don't know how many times I've read this book. If you told me it was 20 times, I'd probably believe you. My first copy, looked just like this. It no longer does. It's in several pieces, but I've kept it. And I hate to admit to it, but it came from my school library. And they're probably still wondering where it is decades later. But this was really sort of my greatest introduction to all of these subjects coming together: presidential history, first ladies, the White House. Go ahead and go to the next slide. This slide kind of goes in more deeply to the many different books that I looked at those early ages. You'll see the Eleanor Roosevelt biography up in the corner. It was just a little Dell Yearling book. Bought it at the Scholastic Book Fair. And my dad would have me read to him from that book. And again, another sort of supportive thing from my family. I had my mom, who was very supportive of all of my interests. My dad was constantly taking me to the library, checking out huge stacks of books that I'd read, letting me read to him, asking me questions. Something that I really do want to get across here, and this is a little aside from this slide, but a lot of you are academics, you're historians, you have done very serious work in your areas of expertise. And I'm assuming that you often expect that people who are equally as serious are going to be reading your books and studying your articles and that kind of thing. But I want to let you know that there are probably other 8, 10, 12-year-old kids out there who you have no idea that they're looking at your books, but they are. They're reading them, they're looking at the illustrations, they're having their interest caught, they're being sort of challenged to learn new words and new concepts. You just never know who's out there and what impact you're going to have. So while some of these books are, a bit less than serious, I was reading more serious things. I did find journals when I'd visit the library that I'd be thrilled to find. I'd find magazine articles, books that don't have the bright colors that these do. And those really are some of the things that also inspired me. So as you do your work, think about that and know that, yes, all of these very serious people are going to read your work, but so are a lot of people who are just so fascinated by this subject. You really have an impact on them. Now, The President's House, the book, the 2-volume set in the middle by William Seal, I remember that particularly because I was so excited to buy that at the White House Historical Association shop. And this was back, they just had a little cart in the East Colonnade where you go in as a tourist. And my tour was, of course, early in the morning, and I spent the next 12 hours walking around with this bag through 90-degree, incredibly humid Washington, D.C., and it became heavier by the hour, but it's still one of my prized possessions and something that I really still refer to this day to get information about the White House and about the presidents and first ladies. Other books here, White House Diary by Henrietta Nesbitt. This is a book that I encountered at the University of Oregon Library. Now, again, back to my mom. A lot of things go back to the kind of support and encouragement she gave. She worked during the day, and during the summers, there was always the question of, what do you do with your school-age kids during the summer? Well, I don't remember quite how old I was, but probably much younger than I'd let my kids do this today. She'd take me to the University of Oregon, drop me off at the library, and pick me up. She'd do that at her lunch hour and then pick me up after she was done with work. And I would spend that 4.5 hours just walking through the library, looking for books, looking at the microfilm machine, all of the newspaper articles, the great bound magazines, from decades before, and then sitting there and just reading a lot of these books and getting a taste of the subject. So that was another sort of a place that I found a great sense of comfort and also, endless information and endless inspiration for my own interests. The book about Pat Nixon and then Margaret Truman's book about Bess Truman, I really found those fascinating, of course, because they were being written by people who knew them. They were being written by their children. And something I really liked or felt at the time that I read the book about Pat Nixon is there was a lot of information in there that wasn't always happy. It wasn't just a happy portrait, a pleasant portrait of this woman. It was a portrait that really showed us that there was challenge, there was struggle, and how she dealt with it and how she impacted her family and how she impacted the country. I think Pat Nixon is an example of one of those first ladies who only now recently is starting to get kind of the exposure that she deserves. And that's, of course, thanks to Heath Lee, who's a marvelous book, really gave me a lot of pleasure. Bess Truman, also another sort of character. Anybody who was in the J.B. West book, I was immediately fascinated by. And the stories that he told, are just hilarious. If you haven't read the book, and I can't imagine you haven't, I highly recommend it. The Jacqueline Kennedy book was much more positive. In fact, I think it was sort of a book that she approved to some degree, which she didn't approve many books, did she? But she did that, and that book gave me sort of a sense of the beautiful side of the White House and the life in the White House and her own life, which was captivating. Now, just to touch on the two First Ladies volumes, which are by Carl Anthony, who is just one of my favorite people, as well as an author that I really enjoy. These books came to me just at the right time. My interest was already peaked. I was older. I was into my teenage years by this time. And just being able to go First Lady by First Lady into a real understanding, not just of all of those surface things, happy things, personal things that I'd read before, but really now to see their influence, how they influenced policy, how they impacted and related to their husbands and those around them. And I still think that that is one of the most fascinating things about his books, is they really, to me anyway, to my mind, sort of opened up that idea, which we're seeing more and more of now, largely through the work of Flair and East Wing Magazine and so on. So I think that's very exciting. More people can relate to and understand the role of the First Lady and how their efforts have impacted our country. The other book or the other magazine that actually stands right next to upstairs the White House is that 1961 National Geographic magazine. And I think this is especially fascinating because it is a very particular time in the history of the White House and of First Ladies. January 1961, of course, the inauguration of President Kennedy. But this magazine came out in January, and it was a tour of the White House by Mamie Eisenhower. And so it was showing all of the rooms as they were during the Eisenhower period, really as they'd been created during the Truman years, right after the rebuilding of the White House from the inside out. And you're seeing a very 1950s view of a historical house. The way it was decorated, of course, their budget was not quite what they had hoped. Mamie Eisenhower often asked J.B. West, "Mr. West, when can I bring out the real antiques?" And there weren't any extra to bring out, he felt. But we see a White House that's really, I sort of think of it as the Technicolor White House. The colors are so vivid. They're so 1950s. And the furniture is beautiful and luxurious, but again, not in necessarily the most authentic way, but in this period's idea of what it should look like. And I thought it was beautiful, of course. It was the most beautiful house I'd ever seen at that point in my life. And I still look at that magazine and still see those pictures, and it takes me right back to that time. Of course, Mamie Eisenhower was the last First Lady born in the 19th century. And who comes after her but the youngest First Lady, or one of the youngest First Ladies, in Jacqueline Kennedy, who had such a different style, such a different aesthetic and background and understanding and view of what the role of First Lady should be. And if you were to take that magazine and 4 years later reproduce it exactly, but putting photographs in from the Kennedy White House, the difference was startling. Equally beautiful, I think. Well, maybe more beautiful, more authentic, a much finer aesthetic, much more detailed understanding of the period, and the contributions of people who really had a deep understanding of historical interiors. We also see a switch between the way that perhaps President Eisenhower and presidents of that period looked at the stage of the White House versus how Mrs. Kennedy did, and the future view of how to use the White House and what it should look like, using it as a background for the presidency. It's hard to remember, I think, or even know for a lot of people now, that Mamie Eisenhower was every bit as popular as Jacqueline Kennedy. She had a tremendous impact on style and taste and the role of women in the United States. But it was very different than her successors, who really came in. You always hear a breath of fresh air, and I don't know if that's really accurate here. Mamie always seemed to me like a pretty great character. but Jacqueline Kennedy, who is bringing a very different sense of the presidency. I think she was one of the first ladies that really struck me as having a genuine, strong opinion about what that background should look, what the stage set for the presidency should look like. And she executed that very deliberately. With the Eisenhowers, of course, they were very sort of spit and polish military precision. And I think that was very, very appropriate for the time. The Kennedys had still very elegant parties and state dinners, and of course the entertainment. But there was a bit more of a casualness. And I always kind of like to think that maybe the Kennedy years were the first time that people actually had fun when they'd come to the White House, for events rather than sort of the formal aspect of the day. Lady Bird Johnson's White House Diary. I think that is a marvelous look at life in the White House during a particularly turbulent time. And having then gone through and listened to her oral histories and read Julia Swagg's book about Lady Bird, which just came out recently, I think that those were tremendous contributions to this. I'll tell you one thing that I always sort of saw growing up, and from the books that I read, is Lady Bird Johnson and Pat Nixon always seemed to be portrayed as victims of their husbands, victims of the times. There was always some sense that you sort of had to feel sorry for them. But what these latest books, I think, have brought out, and I think this is very important because I think it also speaks to the way we view women and talk about them today, is that these women were partners, that they were full partners with their husbands, and used their positions in the most miraculous, marvelous ways to create opportunities for themselves and for others. And so I really do appreciate this sort of view of looking at first ladies as women of soft power in some cases, but women who have authority and influence in their own right. I think that's so important. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Well, now I'm going to talk a little bit about the art side of things. You've heard me go on about my ideas about first ladies as they came to me during those earlier years. But then I always loved to draw. And I will tell you that I spent hours drawing and copying different pictures, rooms in the White House. They looked nothing like this when I started. And in fact, when I look at this picture, I can't tell what the date is there, maybe 2013. These are the first drawings, first lady related drawings that I made that somebody bought. And what happened is I had made these drawings and I posted them on Facebook. A friend of mine who worked at Hillwood Museum saw them and thought to himself, his colleague who was the buyer at Hillwood might be interested in them. And she looked at them, Lauren Salazar, who has the most marvelous shop at Hillwood. They do such a beautiful job there. She looked at them and thought they would make good note cards and bought them. I had no idea that this was even something that I could consider doing. And from there, it just sort of grew, and I started drawing more. I'd contact presidential historic sites, the White House. I sort of flooded them with drawings for many years. Some of you may even have received them over the years or have received calls from me asking you if you wanted to buy some note cards or if I could draw for you. And so now this has really become a big part of my career is doing these drawings, a lot of them focusing on First Lady fashion. Now, when I first put this presentation together, I was a little worried that it was going to become a Jackie Kennedy fashion show or a Kennedy focused thing, because that's so much of my work relates to the Kennedys and Jacqueline Kennedy. But I tried to add some more things in here. So these are my first drawings, and I look at them now. They're okay, but I am so delighted and surprised that anybody wanted to buy them. If you go on to the next slide, this is a bit more what things look like today, and there's more detail involved and time. And I've even taken an art class since this. I actually have had no art training until just last year. I decided I wanted to take a drawing class because I know there's so many things I don't know, and that was great fun. But I haven't noticed that my own style has changed a lot. I've kind of sort of solidified it now, and a few people have said, I can tell when I see something that you drew it, and kind of like that, so I don't want to change it too much. So why focus on fashion? Well, I'll tell you, in the early days, it was something I saw because it was attractive, it was colorful, it was interesting, beautiful to look at, and certainly that's one of the reasons that all of us are fascinated by the subject of First Lady or any other kind of fashion. But as the years went by and I learned more and more, not just about First Ladies, but in this case about Queen Elizabeth, who was another great sort of presence in my artistic, literary, historical life, uh, learning about her and how she used her clothes, her jewelry, her hats, whatever it was, to send messages, if you will. And Mrs. Kennedy, and I'm sure First Ladies before, but certainly Mrs. Kennedy was also very adept at that. And what you see, for example, in the clothes for the India visit, that white gown in the center, that really does sort of hint or refer back to the idea of the Indian sari. And so you see this using a style from the place that she's going as a way to honor, to sort of nod to the culture that she is experiencing and visiting. Of course, that bright pink coat, pink featured quite heavily and other bright colors in this Indian visit. And I think it was Diana Vreeland who said something about pink, bright pink being the hot pink, being the navy blue of India. And Mrs. Kennedy certainly took that on. On the right side, you see her clothes for the visit to Latin America. And something I think that you'll notice in all of these is they are all designed to sort of catch attention, to be seen. Those very simple but classic lines, the bright colors of most of these things, or bright white, these were all things that were there so that she could be seen and so that people could have a chance to experience this visit from the First Lady and President of the United States. So I'm always fascinated by not just the way it looks, but also the background stories and the amount of time that these women have to take to create these wardrobes for events. Now, I think a lot of people shy away from the idea that clothes are important, that the parties at the White House, the state dinners, all of those things, oh, that's sort of the fluffy side of the president, not the serious side of the presidency. And I recall once actually writing to several first ladies to get answers to questions about state dinners that they'd planned for some writing I was going to do. And the one who wrote back with the most complete response and seemed to be the most enthusiasm was Rosalind Carter, which really sort of surprised me because I don't think of the Carter administration as being one that was really focused on entertaining. The one that wrote back, actually a secretary wrote back, and with the least enthusiasm was Nancy Reagan. And the secretary said that Mrs. Reagan did not see entertaining and her clothes as the primary focus of her time in the White House. Just after that, probably within a couple of months, a book written by Nancy Reagan came out about entertaining at the White House and went through every party that was held there. But I digress. Still, I think that there was that sense, and even there still is now, that this isn't the important side of the presidency. But in my view, it's one of the most interesting and influential parts of the presidency because first ladies have sort of an extra layer or extra tools in their arsenal that they can use to deploy diplomacy, to send messages, to show what interests them, what they think is important. And I think that's really vital. And I think it's a really wonderful thing that they can do and that they have at their hand. I think Michelle Obama has been really very interesting in the fact that she's just had this book out about her clothes. And there's really a significant display, I understand, at the Obama Museum, at the Obama Presidential Library, showing what she wore, because there was that understanding that this is an important part of the presidency. I do want to say one more thing about Nancy Reagan. I also thought it was rather funny that was the response when I heard, not I guess several years later, that her first advice to Michelle Obama was have more state dinners. So I guess entertaining was important to her after all. Go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So when we talked earlier, Jennifer and I, about some of the questions she had for me, one of the questions she had is, what is my most popular card? And I'll tell you, it's the one in the middle, Jackie's hats. I just came up with that many years ago now, and I don't know, it's just sort of a fun thing to do. I had no idea that it would sell. Actually, I can say it's sold thousands of cards. I can't believe I can say that actually now that I am, but it's been sold many, many times. A lot of people like that card, which is great. I appreciate that, and it's sort of one of the more whimsical ones I think that I've done. On the left, you see this dress. I think it was Dior, Christian Dior, that, and somebody will correct me, I'm sure, that designed and Mrs. Kennedy wore before she was First Lady. And she added this red satin wrap to it, which, of course, really set it off. And it was something that, even though it wasn't during her time as First Lady, I think it was really indicative of what her style would become. And then a dress she wore on the right to a state dinner for India for Prime Minister Nehru. And speaking of that dinner and other events like that, here's another place where first ladies use that soft power that we're talking about. We've actually used as the title of this presentation is the soft power that's brought to bear in those relationships that are created between heads of state and others at that level. And just to read about all of the people who sort of fell under Jacqueline Kennedy's spell, whether it's de Gaulle or Nehru, who was, I guess, a very prickly character in some respects, especially with other men, although he was seemed to prefer female company, and that was very helpful. So another little example of soft power that has been employed so often by first ladies during the presidency. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So again, I'm sorry it's so Jackie focused, but we actually do move on in just a little bit. This is sort of a new idea I've had, and I'd love your thoughts on it if I can, if you want to share them. But taking an outfit or an event and showing all of the parts of it, picking it sort of apart and showing them rather than as the whole, but as the pieces. And of course, her inaugural outfit, whether it was the grayish coat she wore on the day or her dress that evening for the inaugural balls, I found it fun to sort of take the little pieces of what those outfits looked like and separate them so you could see the elements. Also, the drawing in the center is of the brooch that she wore at the inauguration and many times after. Always thought that was a particularly lovely piece, and it was great fun to draw. So, um, you know, there's so many elements here. And one of the things that I've always found interesting is that dress up in the upper right corner next to the cape that she wore for her the inaugural balls. She didn't care for it that much. She really preferred the gown she wore the night before for the inaugural gala, which was much simpler. And it's actually rather iconic because I think it was Richard Avedon took some photos of her that they're on the cover of the book about her fashion for the exhibit at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, but not her favorite. Go ahead and move on to the next one. All right, so I have drawn all of the first ladies, even beyond this, all of their clothes. And this is the first thing I ever sold to the White House Historical Association. Now, I had been sending drawings to the White House Historical Association for years, hoping that someone would see them and maybe they'd want to, buy a note card or something. And I did this poster featuring the inaugural gown or an important dress worn by just about every first lady. And it's since been updated, and Mrs. Biden, Dr. Biden, and Mrs. Trump are also shown on that. But this was such a fun project to sit down and research, sort of go back to researching each first lady, what they wore, reminding myself that not all first ladies were the wives of the presidents, but sometimes a daughter, a niece, and just sort of reacquainting myself with that and getting to show and remember how styles have changed over the years. Some of these were real challenge to draw, like Florence Harding. Jennifer just has her article out about that, because the look of the 20s was so very different. The dresses were made and looked very, very differently than the ones that came before. You see Betty Ford there. That's a very 1970s outfit, and she really sort of exemplified it. We'll see another slide in a moment of some of her dresses from those years, which showed such a change from what came before. This was one of my favorite projects. I think you can tell I'm rather enthusiastic about it, and it sold for a few years there. And every time I send a message out to a First Lady related museum or historic site, I send this to hoping somebody will take it again. But people don't want posters right now for some reason. I'm sure they'll swing back around again. Go ahead and go to the next slide, please. Mary Todd Lincoln, and I actually have the mug that this was featured on. This was done for the Lincoln presidential, President Lincoln's cottage, and also the Mary Todd Lincoln home. And this features some of her gowns. And of course, Mary Lincoln is fascinating on so many levels, not just her clothes. But people are still interested in her clothes. They still want to see them. They love to see these vibrant colors. And I think one of the nice things about the fashion and all of that is that it serves as a way to bring people in. First, they're looking at these clothes and think, oh, this is lovely. This is interesting. I want to know more about that aspect of her. And then it takes you into some of the more serious things that we know about Mary Lincoln, but also about all of the First Ladies, starting at that more approachable level. And that's actually something that I hope that my work does, and that a lot of the books that I really appreciated the most did. And also a thing that I think First Ladies do, and that is make the presidency more approachable. One of the things I love about First Lady history, as opposed to a lot of presidential history, and I would say women's history as well, although I don't know that that's a good term, because, as Hillary Clinton said, women's history is humans' history. It's history. But to look at that specifically, I've always been far more interested in the history of women and the history of powerful women, and whether it's the Queen, whether it's First Ladies, because it includes so much more detail, I find. Not only do you have the historical big events that are happening in the presidency or in the world, but you have all of that information about what life was like, what their relationships were like, what were they doing at home, what were they all eating, who were their friends, all of these details that I think is so often left out of a lot of very serious presidential history is unfortunate, because learning these things through the First Lady, you find people that are human. You find people that you can relate to, that you can have a better understanding of. There's not the separation that I often find between the presidency and the people. Often through the history of their wives, you are reminded of maybe their more humble beginnings. You're reminded that they had to struggle when they were first married. They had experiences that we have. And that's something that I think the history of First Ladies really does bring us, that is not available as easily elsewhere. So just sort of gives you another idea of why I was so interested in it. Reading about the presidents was fun, but it could also get a little boring after a while, versus the stories that I was reading about the First Lady, and again, all of the things I've just talked about. So you're a good group to tell that to, being academics and writers, and this is what we like to hear, what we like to learn about. Go ahead and go to the next slide, please. Well, I'm not going to say this is one of my favorite drawings, but it's something that I find fascinating, because Eleanor Roosevelt is one of the last First Ladies you're going to think about when you think about fashion. But the FDR Library allowed me, or asked me, I'm not sure how it all happened, to draw her inaugural gowns. And I did, and I put them, this is actually a print that's sold at the Roosevelt Library. And it sold really, really well, far better than I thought. There are more people who are interested in First Lady fashion and Eleanor Roosevelt clothes than I ever would have thought, which again sort of reminds you that even with First Lady with just a huge sort of list of accomplishments and areas that we can look at, people still want to see her clothes. They're still interested in what she wore and how her hair changed over all of those years. That I suppose I could do some work just on hairstyles. I don't know. Maybe that's something to explore. But even Eleanor Roosevelt's clothes are of interest to people. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Well, I've really moved us up here. As I said, I've drawn just about every First Lady, some article of their clothing, some aspect of their White House life, but Michelle Obama being the most recent. And her clothes are beautiful, of course, and they're great fun to draw. And this is really sort of the style I've taken on now going forward. In a moment, you'll see why I don't draw faces. People often ask, well, why don't you put a face on these? A couple of people, well, when I've surveyed people, asking them what they like best, most people have chosen this sort of look with the dress form. Others, the second choice is the faces with the heads without faces, because I think partly you're not sort of busy trying to decide if it really looks like them or not. If you get the hair right or if you have the clothes right, that's enough, and the face can be distracting. Go ahead and go to the next slide. I'm hoping and here's why. These are my First Lady caricatures, and I hope you can tell who each one of them are. But you can see why faces maybe are not my strongest point. If I want to do it with a little bit of humor, perhaps, but I don't think these are really appropriate for what I'm trying to do in other ways. I actually did a mug with all of these First Ladies caricatures on them for someone, and then another one, sort of a Texas mug that had Barbara Bush, Lady Bird Johnson, and Laura Bush on it, and flags of Texas. So go ahead and go to the next slide. Well, it's not just First Ladies that I'm fascinated by. It's the White House as well. Has always, to me, it's sort of interchangeable. My interest in the White House and the First Ladies all goes together. And I wanted you to see just a tiny bit of my process here. First, the image on the left is of the green room during the Coolidge administration. And this doesn't come from a photograph of the event shown here specifically. It's sort of my idea. This is used as a birthday card for donors at the White House Historical Association. And so I added a sort of a birthday theme, maybe a little party going on in the green room. The picture in the middle shows you what a drawing might look like in the middle of the process. I've got the line work done, I've got some color added in, and then on the right you see half of the drawing there. And this is a card that I believe is maybe still offered at the White House Historical Association and the President's House shop. So I love drawing and adding the color to these rooms. And people often ask me, what's your favorite part? Frankly, it's getting out the marker that I'm going to use. And you see I use markers there, getting to use all of these marvelous colors. Part of the reason I'm an illustrator is because I love art supplies. And I think Jennifer asked me how many markers I had, and I think I'm somewhere in the neighborhood of 280 that I regularly use, and there are drawers full of other ones, and they're everywhere. I remember before I started doing all of this, I saw a picture in Mary Engelbright's magazine of her drawing table, and it was just covered with cups of markers of every color, and I knew when I saw that was for me. So here's an example of that. Go ahead and go to the next slide. This is the picture in the center is not the best quality, but I don't have a better scan of it. This was actually one very long drawing that it's divided into two parts so you can see it here. But this was a panoramic view of the Kennedy Blue Room that James Archer Abbott, who wrote marvelous books about the White House restoration, asked me to do for him. And this was, at that time especially, something that I really did feel was sort of above my skill level. But he was incredibly helpful in guiding me and correcting. And this was one of my favorite projects. It took forever. And I had to do so many strange little things to print it and to scan it. It was just crazy, but it was a great fun to do. On either side, you see drawings from a series I did of floral arrangements in the White House during the Kennedy years. I've done many others since then, many other administrations, but these will show you sort of the changing Blue Room. It shows the Blue Room here during the early part of the Kennedy administration before the walls had been changed to the white silk. And of course, when we look at the White House today, a lot of the sort of basic structure of the Kennedy restoration is still there. You still have the Blue Room with the white or cream colored walls and the blue fabric around the top and what have you. So the White House was changed quite drastically at that time, but also has remained much in that vein. Go ahead and go to the next slide. The Red Room, as I mentioned, that poster outside my first grade classroom. I remember the red room so vividly. And it really, I think it might have actually been one of the Eisenhower period pictures of that time. Also in that National Geographic magazine, they had a couple of just the most evocative pictures of the White House. The Red Room. One showed one of the butlers pouring tea, preparing for a tea party in the room, and it was just something about it really captured my attention. And that's what this picture on the left is based on, the Eisenhower Red Room. It's sort of trying to capture the damask on the walls. The next one shows the Kennedy era and how the room was changed so much. It was a little bit pinkier, I think, than it's showing up here. It was called cerise, the color, so a bit of a pinkier red. And then on the right is a much more recent view of the red room. Also, just such fun to get out those red pens and draw, but also to look in when I'm looking at the pictures or trying to sort of research the room, the things that you notice that have changed, the small details, and still the things that have stayed the same. The White House is fascinating as a way of looking at the history of our country, the changing styles, the changing uses of the rooms. And I find that to be always an interesting topic. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Well, this is another thing I'd love to have your opinion on. It's, again, taking, instead of an outfit, it's taking a room and taking some of the key elements in that room and showing them to, I hope, their advantage. Again, the Kennedy room, but how each of these pieces of furniture stood out, how they were different, how they were new, I think shows in this drawing. And I'd love to have your thoughts on that. As you can see, sometimes I'll get an idea and I just take it and keep running with it. When I started doing those floral arrangements, I don't know how many I did. I was working on those for weeks. And then when I started doing these, I've gone through this process of taking the rooms apart, if you will, and showing their furniture. I do have sort of a goal or a dream of doing this to all of the Kennedy rooms, but maybe taking it beyond that and showing it again through the years and what pieces were important, how the styles changed. I find that my interest is still, even after all these years, going deeper and deeper and looking for more details and more history for what was happening behind the scenes. Go ahead and go to the next one. One of my favorite projects was for the White House Historical Association, and it's been several years ago, but they asked me to do a Thanksgiving card because they sent out a Thanksgiving card to their donors, their members. And there were three. I think four of them, but here are three of the examples. And I just love that idea of, first of all, a different holiday, something other than Christmas, and one that I particularly love. Also, the colors of the White House, the state dining room specifically in this case, really lent themselves to an autumn focus. And I just had such fun doing these cards. It was also an opportunity to do something sort of different, drawing the table there, as you see, set for an event. This was actually during the Kennedy years, of course. And this was a dinner for President and Mrs. Truman given by the Kennedys. And you see I believe that's the Eisenhower Charger, but they used the Truman China for that as well. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Christmas and the White House. People talked about Mamie Eisenhower and her love of Christmas, and it's sort of a sense that she might have gone a little too far with it. And she also loved to decorate for Easter. And there's a story of how she had the sound of birds singing piped into the White House during Easter. And at the end of the day, she'd tell J.B. West, "Mr. West, would you turn off the birds?" And at Christmas, she loved to sort of go crazy at Christmas, if you will, and would have Christmas songs playing and all of that, and decorated. On the left, you see the entrance hall and the cross hall as decorated. I think that was 1953 by Mrs. Eisenhower. And if you will permit me to say so, that is tame compared to the way that things are decorated now. It's so much more elaborate than it was at that time. The image on the right is of the 1969 Christmas tree. It was moved out of the Blue Room, which was undergoing some changes. And this was during the Nixon administration. I've actually drawn a couple of different images featuring the Nixon administration's Christmas decorations because Pat Nixon really went all out and they were quite striking. just to sort of talk about Pat Nixon for a moment, and certainly in relation to Christmas, but I think she was one of the first ladies who really brought the White House so much closer to the people. Jackie Kennedy and Pat Nixon actually did in different ways. Mrs. Kennedy, through that guidebook, which I think was such a great idea, her thought that people needed to have something to take away from them, that children needed to have something, and that they could read above their level. It didn't have to be simple. It could be really, well written and full of information. And then Pat Nixon. I mean, she instituted tours of the White House for the blind. Can you imagine? To me, that sounds like really a groundbreaking idea for today, let alone 50 years ago. And the tours of the gardens, and really making an effort to open the White House even more during Christmas in the evenings for candlelight tours, so that people who worked in Washington who couldn't get to those tours otherwise would have an opportunity to see the White House. You'll notice also that when I talk about first ladies, I don't really talk about politics. And that's because when I look at first ladies, although of course they're very political in their way, to me it's something along with the White House that I try to look at that transcends politics in a sense. Because as I mentioned before, I think that they have this role for the country of sort of bringing people in maybe more easily than a president might, and sharing the White House, sharing the presidency with them. So again, you'll find I just put out a product somewhere, a National First Ladies Library, and these magnets that are in the form of First Lady gowns. And somebody said, they're all Republicans. And I said, I didn't even think about that. Who cares? They're all great dresses, and they were all fascinating first ladies. So I try to look at things from that perspective in terms of this interest. Now, the picture in the center is from 2004. It's based on the decorations in the Green Room in 2004. And I kind of like this idea of looking out from the White House. And I did another picture some time ago. It was just a black and white drawing from behind of Eleanor Roosevelt staring out one of the windows. And I think we're so used to looking at the White House and looking into the White House. What is it like to be inside looking out? And that's an interesting idea to me. Go ahead and go to the next slide. I think this might be one of my last in terms of my actual presentation, but it goes back to soft power. And that is something I wanted to mention because I think it's such a powerful form of diplomacy, not just diplomacy, but of just exercising influence and in some cases, very real power. And two people that I think were particularly good at that were, of course, Queen Elizabeth II. In fact, the first time I heard the term soft power, it was entirely related to her and had something to do with her hat when she opened Parliament for the first time, wearing sort of not the crown. And it was at a time when Britain was deciding whether to exit the European Union, and everybody thought that this hat she wore was sending a signal. I don't think it was, but it could have been. But she was very adept at that, and I think a lot of first ladies probably looked to that and saw how well she used that. And here we have Michelle Obama and the Queen in a very sort of tender moment and a very personal moment that shocked people. Lady Susan Hussey, who is one of the Queen's longest serving ladies in waiting, is sort of in this picture. We can't see her, but I know she's there looking on, and said that she had never seen the Queen put her arm around someone in that way, with the exception of her children. And even then, it wasn't a common occurrence. And yet everybody thought Michelle Obama was the one who touched the Queen first. In fact, it was the Queen who put her arm around Mrs. Obama, and Michelle Obama reciprocated. And I believe Michelle Obama said, at that moment, we were just two ladies with tired feet. And this very personal connection that our first ladies make and that other heads of state can make, it's important to remember that they are human beings. They're not just these sort of icons that we see. They're people with feelings. They're people who can make connections, and it's important that those connections are made on the personal level as well. The brooch in the middle there is the rock moss agate diamond and gold brooch, very simple, really, that Michelle Obama bought for the Queen as a personal gift. And I remember her saying that she didn't really think that much of it, that it was going to be, as popular as it turned out to be. And the Queen wore it the next night to the reciprocal dinner that was held at Winfield House. And this shocked Michelle Obama to see that this very simple sort of gift was appreciated by the Queen in that way. Again, soft power at work there, a gentle nod saying that I appreciate this. It means something to me. And our first ladies are so good at doing that. And Michelle Obama was certainly a master in that regard. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Well, that's kind of it. I mean, believe me, I could have talked much longer, and it looks like I'm almost out of time, and gone into greater depth about a lot of things. I hope this was interesting to you. If you would like to see this presentation or have it sent to you, you can let me know. My email address is there. I used to have a website, but it was so hard to find the time to keep it up that I just sort of started using Instagram. And I will warn you that there are a lot of pictures of my kids on there as well. You'll see all of this that I draw, but I'm not sure that one would say it was a professional Instagram account. You'll learn a lot about the Gariepy family there too. My wife, 8 kids, my daughter, and 7 boys, which also is rather interesting, isn't it? Those poor boys, they didn't have a dad who was into sports and all of that. He drawing first ladies, but they've always been very supportive, luckily. So with that, if there are any questions, if there's any time for them, I'm happy to answer them. And I thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Jake. That was just wonderful. And I just have to tell you that going through all those slides and looking at all your work, and I said this to you before, that what I get from your work is comfort. When I look at it, it just gives me a sense of comfort. And I'm sure others do as well. And we do have a question from Diana, and she's talking a little bit about the importance of books that you mentioned early on in your younger years. And her question is, there are still books that need to be written. What First Lady would you like to see one of our members write about?
I would like more information about Grace Coolidge, actually. Um, Both Grace Coolidge and Lady Bird Johnson share something that I've always found fascinating, and that is that they had different periods in their life that are so separate. Both were well educated and had a profession that they were sort of geared toward with their degrees, and Mrs. Coolidge with teaching the deaf and what have you. Then they married, and they really became partners with, to some degree, in Grace Coolidge's case, definitely in Lady Bird Johnson's case, involved in their husbands' lives, and their careers were really what drove them. But then when their husbands died, they had entirely new lives. Grace Coolidge is traveling all over the place. She's doing all kinds of new things that she couldn't do because her husband wasn't interested in them. Lady Bird Johnson, the same thing, going on trips, serving as a regent at the University of Texas, just sort of coming into their own. And I think those are fascinating stories. And I also just really like Grace Coolidge. I want to know more about how she lived with Calvin Coolidge.
Yes. Okay. Well, get writing, ladies.
Yeah.
And and gentlemen. So if you decided to draw a president, do you think it would be as captivating to consumers?
No, I think it could be interesting, but it's not as captivating because at some point, if you're dealing with maybe the first 10, 15, there's can be a great deal of difference in terms of what that picture is going to look like. If you look from, I don't know, 1910 on, it's not going to be this much different at all. It's a dark suit, it's a blue or a red tie. Maybe you get to be kind of fun and draw Gerald Ford's plaid suit, Barack Obama's tan suit, but they're not as engaging. And I've actually tried. I tried to do a poster that was just like the first ladies with the presidents, and I gave up after a while because it just wasn't captivating.
Mhm. What do you hope people take away from your work?
Well, I think the word that you used is actually one of the most important. And I don't just draw these things. Of course, I do a lot of house portraits for people. They want to have their house drawn. They want to have the place they were married drawn, a famous building that means something to them. And the thing that I always want people to take away is a sense of comfort. Even if the subject itself maybe isn't lending it to that automatically, I want them to feel good having looked at this picture. I want the colors to make them feel good. I want them to maybe want to learn something more about it. And if you look at my buildings, I'd say well over 90% of them have yellow windows. And my idea there being that the lights are always on and you're always welcome. So that's I suppose what I'd want people to take away in the end.
Thank you, Jake. Thank you so much for sharing your work and your expertise and your talent with us. And I think Diana is coming back to say a few words.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Oh, well, thank you. This was as fascinating as I thought it would be. I love your art. And I wrote a note too that 6 portraits you had with the faces, they look exactly like the First Lady Christmas ornaments I have. Did they model those on your, because they were same dresses and everything?
Well, I don't know if they did or not. I better find out.
Better find out, I think so.
There's some royalties owed to me here, I think.
Right. So Jennifer, thank you so much for moderating. This has been great. If you want to share this with anyone, those of you who are watching, it's at flare-net.org. That was just up there. If you go to the lower right corner, there is a YouTube icon. You can also share it from Facebook. So the recording will be both on Facebook and on YouTube. So any of you who want to share it, please check there. We also have an announcement box on the Flare website that has all the information, and you can get it from there also. So this has been great. Next month on September 23rd at 7 p.m., we're going to get a little behind the scenes tour of the 200th birthday exhibit of Julia Grant. And that will be going offline soon, and they have a collection. I got a chance to see it. A collection of artifacts that came from family members, that came from a variety of places. They've never all been together before. And so if you can't make it to St. Louis before the end of September, you got a chance to see it there. And then on Monday, August 31st at 9 a.m., our next podcast, American Flotus, will be released. And we never tell who this is with until it's released. So it's always a surprise. So anytime after 9 a.m., you can once again go to our website. There's an American Flotus box there. You can click on it and you'll find out who our latest interview is with for American Flotus. And thank you again to both of you. Thank you to Sharon for a seamless production once again. Thank you everyone for joining, especially our members. If you're not a member, like I said, we're looking for new members. And I think what Jake and Jennifer really represent is the breadth of the membership of this organization. Anyone who has an interest is really invited to join us. And this is our 5th anniversary. We celebrated on June 21st, so we've had a whole year. And one of the things, everything we have on our website is free for members and anyone who isn't a member. It's for the public, because one of our purposes is to educate the public. And people like Jake are doing that in a very accessible way. So we do have a special promotion for our 5th anniversary. We're calling it Give Me 5. And if you go to our website, there's a donate button. Send us $5, send us 15, 25, 5,000. Anything that has a 5 in it, we will be happy to take to celebrate our 5th anniversary, so that we can keep this kind of programming coming to you, and especially the students. So thank you again. Good evening, everyone, and we'll see you next month.